Pocan, nominated to the Eastern District of Wisconsin. Judge Pocan was scheduled to appear today, but the traditional practice of the committee is not to proceed with hearings on district court nominees until both of the home state senators return a blue slip. Unfortunately, Senator Johnson's communication means that Judge Pocan will not be testifying at today's hearing. According to Senator Johnson's statement, he is withholding a blue slip on this nomination because Judge Pocan does not currently live in Green Bay, Wisconsin. But as I understand it, Judge Pocan does live nearby and has made it clear that he would relocate to Green Bay. He is a sitting state judge. What's more, Senator Johnson knew full well back in June that Judge Pocan did not live in Green Bay at this time. Yet that did not prevent the bipartisan Wisconsin Federal Nominating Commission from recommending Judge Pocan to Senators Baldwin and Johnson. And it did not prevent Senator Johnson from joining Senator Baldwin in recommending Judge Pocan to the White House as one of the 4 candidates to fill the Eastern District of Wisconsin vacancy. Let me emphasize that point. Senator Johnson is blocking this committee from proceeding on a nominee he recommended to President Biden. I'd also like to note that I'm disappointed in Senator Johnson's lack of communication about his intention to withhold this blue slip. Senator Johnson's staff did not respond to 4 separate communications from my staff sent over the course of nearly a month. Despite these efforts, my office learned secondhand that Senator Johnson would prevent Mr. Pocan from going forward at 7 o'clock last night. Such a lack of communication is unacceptable and frankly disrespectful to the nominee and his family. I hope that Senator Johnson will rethink his position. Judge Pocan received a rating of unanimously well qualified from the American Bar Association. He has extensive experience as a sitting state court judge, and before that time, an experience in history as a commercial litigator. He has the temperament that we're looking for in all judges. I also hope that Senator Johnson's position is not an indication of any procedures to come in the future. Let me just leave it at that. It would be a disservice to litigants, to the administration of justice, and to judiciary. During the 4 years of President Trump, Democrats returned a total of 130 blue slips on 88 district court nominees, 85 of which were ultimately confirmed. The Senate confirmed 168 Trump district court nominees who required a blue slip. This means that more than 50% of the confirmed district court nominees who required a blue slip moved forward only because we tried on our side to negotiate in good faith with the White House and allow these nominations to proceed. I can speak to that personally. We negotiated, Senator Duckworth and I, for Illinois vacancies with substantial success. And we thought there was a real give and take in communication, and we kept our good faith efforts up throughout the Trump presidency, despite the clear differences on many political issues. I'm not going to go any further with this. I've told the press outside that before I say anything more, I want to discuss this with Senator Baldwin, who is part of this bipartisan process, and understand more details involved in it. We're going to hear from 3 district court nominees and 1 Justice Department nominee today. Judge Sherilyn Garnett, nominated to the Central District of California, Nina Morrison to the Eastern District of New York, Judge Trina Thompson to the Northern District of California, and Paul Montero, who's been nominated to be Director of the Justice Department's Community Relations Service, better known as CRS. 2 of our colleagues are here today to formally introduce our judicial nominees, and I have the privilege personally of introducing Mr. Montero. Before that, we turn to that introduction, I want to issue a few thoughts about the 3 nominees. The slate represents continued efforts to bring balance to the judiciary. Among these 3 nominees are 2 sitting state court judges, 1 nominee who served for many years as federal prosecutor, a former public defender, and a nominee who has worked to bring justice to those wrongfully convicted of crime. All 3 of these judicial nominees understand their role on the federal district court. All were rated unanimously well qualified by the American Bar Association. All 3 are committed to applying precedent and being impartial and even-handed. We also have before us today Paul Montero. A native of Maryland, Mr. Montero attended the University of Maryland for his undergraduate work, and then Howard University School of Law. After graduating from law school, Mr. Montero began a career dedicated to public service. He worked as Associate Director in the Obama White House of Public Engagement and as Director of AmeriCorps. In November 2015, Mr. Montero was appointed to serve as Acting Director of CRS, held that role until 2017. Currently holds two roles: Chief of Staff, Assistant VP of External Affairs at Howard University, and an at-large board member of the Prince George's County Public Schools Board of Education. Throughout his career and on top of his busy schedule in public service, he's made it a priority to give back to the community. He volunteers with several nonprofits focusing on disadvantaged people: the Latin American Youth Center, the Maryland Multicultural Youth Center, and the Kingdom Fellowship AME Community Development Corporation. As I mentioned, Mr. Montero is no stranger to this office, having served as its acting director. I have no doubt that CRS will benefit not just from Mr. Montero's institutional knowledge, but also from his proven leadership. With that, I turn to Ranking Member Grassley for his remarks.
Yeah, I congratulate all the nominees, and my statement's kind of repetitive of what the chairman said, so I'm just going to put my statement in the record.
Thank you, Senator Grassley. I note that Senator Schumer has not arrived, and I am also told Senator Feinstein will not be able to join us today. She submitted a statement of support for several nominees in the record, and without objection, it will be included. So next is Senator Padilla, here to introduce our two California nominees. Senator Padilla.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member Grassley. Proud to introduce two outstanding nominees to serve as federal district judges in California. First, Judge Trina Thompson is with us, joined by her daughter Alexis and other close friends and family. Judge Thomas is nominated to the bench of the Northern District of California, a community where she has spent her life serving. Judge Thomas earned her undergraduate degree and her JD from UC Berkeley. She began her legal career with the Alameda County Public Defender's Office, where she spent 5 years dedicated to upholding the constitutional guarantee of effective legal counsel. Judge Thomas's legal skill and commitment to due process enabled her to build a successful practice in criminal defense. And over the following decade, she handled dozens of criminal trials, and she continued to work with the County Public Defender's Office to take on pro bono clients in the community. In 1999, based on her extensive legal experience and record of public service, Judge Thomas was selected by the judges of the Alameda County Superior Court to serve as Juvenile Court Commissioner in the Dependency and Delinquency Court. And 3 years later, the people of Alameda County elected her to serve as a Superior Court judge. A legal trailblazer, Judge Thompson was the first Black woman to win election to serve as a judge in Alameda County. Now, nearly 20 years later, the choice made by the people of Alameda County has been vindicated time and again. Judge Thompson has continuously demonstrated her sense of fairness, commitment to justice, and dedication to the rule of law. I know Judge Thompson will continue to pave the road to equal justice on the bench of the Northern District, and I'm proud to support her nomination. It's also an honor to welcome Judge Sherilyn Garnett, who is here with her husband, Keithley, and her children, Keith, Kenneth, and Lauren, and other loved ones. Judge Garnett is nominated to serve on the U.S. District Court for the Central District of California. She brings outstanding qualifications as a lawyer, as a jurist, and as a public servant. Judge Garnett earned her undergraduate degree from UC Riverside and her JD from Harvard Law School. After starting her career in private practice, in 2001, Judge Garnett became an assistant U.S. attorney for the Central District of California. She spent the next 13 years serving in that office, prosecuting hundreds of criminal cases which ranged from child exploitation to domestic terrorism. Judge Garnett received numerous awards from the FBI and other federal agencies for her skill as a prosecutor. She also earned leadership positions in the U.S. Attorney's Office, serving as the Domestic Terrorism Coordinator and eventually becoming Chief of the General Crimes Section. Recognizing her hard work and record of excellence as a litigator, Governor Brown appointed Judge Garnett to the Los Angeles Superior Court in 2014. Over the past 8 years, she has served with distinction as a Superior Court judge and a Justice Pro Tem on the California Court of Appeal. Judge Garnett is also an outstanding nominee who is committed to providing equal justice to all. I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting her confirmation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Padilla. I ask my colleagues, understanding that Senator Schumer has a busy schedule and is literally, we're told, 2 minutes away. So if we don't mind standing down for 2 minutes in deference to his schedule, I would ask.
Mr. Chairman, is that Senator Schumer time, or is that like real world time?
Let's just hope it's real world time.
Okay.
Kennedy.
Senator Kennedy, we're assured you can set your clock to it.
Exactly 2 minutes. Senator Schumer, thanks for joining us. We understand your busy schedule and recognize you now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for being late. Not much going on these days, trying to get a CR done. Okay, so I want to thank Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Grassley, and all the members of the committee for the opportunity to come before you and introduce a truly standout nominee to the federal bench. I always look forward to the days when I'm able to return to this committee where I served for so long alongside so many of you. So thank you for your graciousness in recognizing me today. Today it is my honor to introduce a great New Yorker nominated to serve as a federal judge. Where are you? There you are. Nina Morrison and her daughter. Is your wife here too? No. Okay. And her daughter is here with her. Nina Morrison, who I urged President Biden to select as a district judge for the Eastern District of New York. Ms. Morrison has all the qualities necessary to be an outstanding member of the federal bench. For one, she was born and raised in New York. What else do I need to say? All kidding aside, Ms. Morrison's credentials are impeccable. She's a graduate of Yale NYU School of Law and clerked for Judge Pierre Laval on the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. After law school and her clerkship, Ms. Morrison embarked on a career path that is all too rare for those nominated to the federal bench. She's not from a big corporate law firm. Nor is she a federal prosecutor. Rather, she is something else entirely, an attorney who has dedicated the bulk of her career to representing those who could not speak for themselves and more precisely, those wrongly convicted of crimes they did not commit. As Executive Director and now Senior Litigation Counsel at the Innocence Project, Ms. Morrison has spent the last 2 decades working at an organization dedicated to representing indigent individuals incarcerated at both the state and federal level, assisting these people with various forms of post-conviction relief. And I want to be clear, the Innocence Project isn't just where she works. It's an institution she helped grow from the ground up, taking what began as a clinic at Cardozo School of Law and turning it into one of the nation's premier criminal justice reform organizations. Hers is truly laudable work. Over the years, Ms. Morrison has been lead counsel or co-counsel in cases that have freed more than 30 innocent individuals, and not just from prison, but sometimes from death row. From death row. Her work is not just a shining example of justice, it is literally life-saving. And through it all, Ms. Morrison is respected across New York as a highly reasonable, even-mannered, and deeply knowledgeable attorney. She's been invited to train prosecutors and judges on the best practices for discovery, use of evidence, and conviction practices. When prosecutors reach out to attorneys who represent convicted individuals for advice, it's a sure sign of respect, trust, and confidence in Ms. Morrison's judgment, prosecutors reaching out to her. For all these reasons, from her credentials to her experience to her reputation as a trusted and fair-minded individual, I have every bit of confidence Ms. Morrison would make an excellent judge. For years, as we all know, our courts have been overrepresented with individuals who check certain boxes, disproportionately white men from elite institutions who worked either in corporate law firms or as prosecutors. Many of them, including many I have recommended, have served admirably, but we need more perspectives on the bench like the one Ms. Morrison would bring. And don't take my word for it. Today, this committee will have a chance to hear from her directly. I want to thank Ms. Morrison for being here. I want to congratulate her on her nomination. And I thank my colleagues for their graciousness in letting me speak this morning.
Thank you, Senator Schumer. We're always glad to welcome you back to the Senate Judiciary Committee. And I know you have to move on to other responsibilities, but thank you for being here this morning. So now that the introductions are completed, we will ask our nominees to join us at the witness table.
Thank you, Director.
And the staff will set up a few things to help us as soon as the photos are finished. If the nominees could come forward to the witness table, please. Stay standing for a moment. Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give before the committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record reflect that all 4 nominees have answered in the affirmative. And now I'll give them each 5 minutes to say a few words about themselves and their families that have joined them today, starting with Judge Garnett.
Good morning. I'm honored to be here today. I would like to express my sincere gratitude to you, Chair Durbin, for scheduling this hearing and for your service on this committee. I'd also like to thank Ranking Member Grassley and all the members of the Judiciary Committee for participating in this hearing. Thank you to Senators Feinstein and Padilla for your support, and Senator Padilla for your kind introduction of me. I'm also very grateful to President Biden for honoring me with this nomination. I'm blessed to have the love and support of my family and friends. With me here today is my husband and love of my life for 22 years, Keith Lee Garnett. Together, we are raising 3 amazing, incredibly talented teenagers. My sons, Keith and Kenneth, are 17 and 14, and my daughter, Lauren, is 13. Also supporting me here today is my sister-in-law, Renee Henry, and my good friends, Diana Andrews and Antoinette Brown. Supporting me from afar are my brother, Dwight Peace, my parents-in-law, Cleveland and Beverly Garnett, and numerous extended family. My father, Alan Peace, and my stepmother, Sophie Peace, could not be here today, but they've extended their well wishes. In this moment, I would also like to honor my mother, Joyce Peace, and my brother, Dean Peace, both of whom have passed on. I know if they were here, they would be filled with joy at my nomination. I'm so grateful to my mom and my dad for the sacrifices they made in leaving their home in Costa Rica and bringing us here to America. And finally, I want to acknowledge the U.S. District Court judge for whom I clerked, the Honorable Barry Ted Moskowitz in the Southern District of California. He embodies so many of the wonderful judicial qualities I strive to emulate every day on the bench. I'm truly grateful to him, to my family and friends, my current colleagues on the Los Angeles Superior Court, my former colleagues in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Altheimer and Gray and elsewhere, my staff on the Los Angeles Superior Court, and so many other individuals who've encouraged me and supported me along this journey. Thank you, Senators, for considering my nomination, and I look forward to speaking with you further.
Thank you very much. Ms. Morrison?
Thank you, Chair Durbin and Ranking Member Grassley, and to the entire committee staff for welcoming me and my fellow nominees here today. I'm grateful to President Biden for the honor of this nomination. Senator Schumer, thank you so much for those incredibly kind words of introduction. I'm truly humbled by the faith you placed in me with your recommendation. I'd like to introduce the family members here with me today. First is my 14-year-old daughter, Anya, known for her brilliance, determination, and enormous heart. Next, my sister, Becky, who is not a lawyer or a judge, but has more insight and good judgment than almost anyone I know. Finally, my parents, Ann and Alan Morrison. Both have spent their lives in public service, and at age 83, my father still works full-time as a professor, writer, lawyer, and mentor. They have showed me that it's possible to work hard and achieve great things while also being loving, present, and devoted parents every day of your children's lives. Also here, representing my professional family, is Marvin Anderson, who's a member of the Board of Directors of the Innocence Project. At age 18, Marvin was wrongly convicted of a crime he did not commit and spent 15 years in prison before he was cleared by DNA evidence. Marvin then went on to fulfill his childhood dream of becoming a firefighter and recently retired as the chief of the fire department in Hanover, Virginia. To Marvin and to all my Innocence Project clients and your families, your courage, grace, and resilience have touched me profoundly, and working with you has been the privilege of a lifetime. Not here today, but watching from afar, are dozens of my aunts, uncles, and cousins. My grandfather, Joshua Morrison, immigrated to the United States at age 4. He was one of 7 children, and my grandmother, Estelle Butler Morrison, was the youngest of 6. Their many descendants are an extremely close-knit and loving clan. I'm also grateful for all the support I've received from my mother's side of the family, whose roots in Missouri date back over 6 generations. I'd also like to acknowledge Judge Pierre Laval, for whom I clerked on the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, a deeply kind and wise man who taught me much about judging and the rule of law. Last but not least, I want to thank the co-founders, staff, board members, and law students at the Innocence Project and Innocence Network, past and present. These extraordinary people devote themselves day in and day out to ensuring that our legal system fulfills America's highest ideals. I am so grateful to have worked alongside them for the last 20 years. Thank you to all the committee members, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Norrison. Judge Thompson?
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you, Chairman Durman, and also Ranking Member Senator Grassley and the committee. And thank you for scheduling this hearing. I've never been this nervous before. Sitting as a judge over 20 years, I am quite intimidated by this room. But I want to extend my sincere thanks to Senator Padilla for your warm remarks, your confidence in me for my 20 years of service, and supporting me throughout this process. And I'd also like to thank Senator Dianne Feinstein. Without her support, I would not be here. I am particularly grateful to President Biden for this honor, for this nomination. It's a special privilege to be considered for such an awesome position, one of which will be a lifetime commitment. I'd like to introduce my family and extended family who's present with me today. My daughter, Alexis Stanley, a recent graduate of the University of Chicago. She is fiercely independent, as well as exceeding all of my expectations. Without her being in my corner and my cheerleader, I would not be sitting in front of you right now. She's also representing her older brother and my son, Daniel Jackson, and my 13-year-old grandson, Daniel Rios Jackson. The love of my life, all three of them. Two of my closest friends from Berkeley Law have also accompanied me today. They are my siblings by choice, Tracy and Dwayne Lyons. Tracy often reminds me that she was a child prodigy, but I think she's only a year younger than I am. Representing my family, who could not be here also, are my cousins, Dr. Wava Tyrone Johnson, who has had an extensive career serving this country and being in the Army and also working for the Pentagon, and he will be retiring on February 28th. Hailing from Texas is my cousin, Vincent Thompson, who also was in the HR department and community service for the Dallas Cowboys, and his son, Zachary Thompson. They are representing our family in Virginia, Atlanta, Arkansas, and Texas. Those who are joining me remotely and who could not be here are my mother, Dorothy Mae McCullough, my brother, Reverend Jeff McCullough, and my other siblings, Regina and the twins, Ernest and Ernestine. My bonus parents, Hazel and Mike Wilson, who served as my support system when I had none. And my foster brother, Andre White. They're also joining us from afar. It is such an overwhelming pleasure to be here, but I would be remiss if I did not mention the people who gave me the wings, and that would be my grandparents, Iola and Willie Martin, from Pine Bluff, Arkansas. They were my first teachers, and they were my first role models. They gave me my voracious appetite to learn, and they also gave me the insatiable desire to continue on with my education. But most importantly, they also were role models at home, in church, and in the community in terms of giving of your time and your love to the community that you serve. Thank you for your indulgence as I shared some of these most important people who were in my life and those who provided me with a voracious appetite for reading and pursuing an education and a position of such stature. I would be remiss further if I didn't also acknowledge my courtroom family that's watching at Alameda County Superior Court and my students from UC Berkeley who are watching this as a civics lesson for what they can anticipate in the future. Thank you to each of you for considering my nomination, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Judge Thompson. Mr. Montero.
Good morning, Chairman Durbin, Ranking Member Grassley, and Senators of the Judiciary Committee. Thank you for allowing me to be here as President Biden's nominee for Director of the Community Relations Service. I'm blessed to have some of my family in the room, including my grandfather, Michael Coburn, my grandmother, Lydia Coburn, my mother, Hilda Coburn, my aunt, Sedaria Coburn, and my baby brother, Perry Lawrence. Without their love and investment in me over the course of my life, I wouldn't be here. As a committed Christian, I'm also the beneficiary of God's amazing grace that has allowed me to experience such meaningful professional opportunities that I could only dream of when I was a child. This country has given me so much to be grateful for. I'm the son of immigrants and the first in my family to graduate high school. Social safety net investments helped me and my siblings through at different periods of time. They helped my sister Angela become a mother to 4 amazing children, my late brother David to become a master plumber, my brother Donnie to become a police officer, and my youngest brother Perry, who's here, to pursue his college education. As a result, I've committed much of my professional life to giving back through public service and working to support our neighbors as they pursue the American dream and their highest ambitions. I learned an incredible amount interning in President George W. Bush's Office of White House Counsel and later for Senator Obama, next door in the Hart Senate Office Building, before transitioning to his campaign. My role in the White House Office of Public Engagement allowed me to work with the broadest swath of Americans, including those from different faith backgrounds, from Catholics, evangelicals, mainline Protestants, Muslims, Dharmic traditions, and several others. I was also privileged to engage with Arab American, Afghan American, and Iranian American communities and connect them with parts of their government responsive to their needs as Americans. My time as the director of AmeriCorps Vista was one of the great privileges of my life, being able to lead a program focused on building sustainable economic opportunity for low-income communities like some of the ones I grew up in. It was a blessing to lead a program powered by idealistic Americans from diverse backgrounds, committed to serving our nation and our neighbors in need. From 2015 to early 2017, I served as the acting director of the Community Relations Service during a period that saw significant jurisdictional conflicts across the country. CRS was called to help in communities like Baton Rouge after Alton Sterling, St. Anthony after Philando Castile, Charleston after Walter Scott, and in Orlando following an attack on the Pulse nightclub, in addition to its standard casework mediating jurisdictional conflicts and offering trainings to school districts, police departments, and local communities. For the past 4.5 years, I've served as the chief of staff and head of the government relations office at Howard University, working with many different stakeholders across campus and across the country as issues of educational, healthcare, and racial disparities in our society and the state of our nation's HBCUs overall have come to the forefront of our public discourse. If confirmed, I believe that my lived experiences and professional record will allow me to lead CRS effectively at a time when its services are sorely needed. The staggering rise of hate incidents, hate crimes, and increasing conflicts within communities that too often result in stalemate remind me of just how important CRS's unique mission is to our country in these times. Thank you for allowing me to be here, and I look forward to the committee's questions.
Thanks, Mr. Montero. Judge Thompson, you said despite 20 years on the bench, it was an intimidating experience to be here this morning. Now you know how I feel day after day in the presence of Senator Grassley.
Thank you.
Nina Morrison, I'm glad that you're sitting there, and I'm glad that you're being considered for this. You know the line of questions that you will face. Like every human endeavor, our system of justice is less than perfect. We know that innocent Americans have been wrongly convicted. Some have been wrongly executed. The Innocence Project, of which you are an integral part, is an organization which I know personally from my state of Illinois and my hometown of Springfield. It leads in the effort to make sure that the cause of justice is served. Innocent people are exonerated, and the truly guilty are found and held responsible. But of course, it raises the question about whether you can be objective and follow the law when it's inconsistent with some of your previous experiences. So how do you answer that?
Thank you, Chair Durbin, for that question. I have been so fortunate to work at the Innocence Project for the last 20 years in my role as an advocate. And I think if I'm lucky enough to be confirmed, I would take as a model the many judges who I've appeared before across the country, often elected from both Republican and Democratic tickets, many of whom had backgrounds very different from mine as prosecutors or from the private sector, but who gave me a fair hearing, who listened to my arguments and followed the law. Were it not for those judges, many of my clients would not be free today, and I will take the memory of those appearances with me if I'm fortunate enough to be confirmed.
Let me ask you about the death penalty. I'm a sponsor of a bill to abolish the federal death penalty. I won't give a speech on it. But the question is, if you are chosen to be a federal judge and face a set of facts and allegations that lead you to believe that a person might be eligible for the death penalty, would you have any hesitancy or second thoughts about imposing it?
Thank you, Senator, and no, I would not. The Supreme Court has repeatedly held that the death penalty is constitutional. That puts it into the hands of policymakers like yourself and prosecutors and the citizens who elect them to decide if it should be available as an appropriate punishment for crime. Of course, no one wants an innocent person executed, but the work that I have done over the last 20 years has been in the role as an advocate. The role of a judge is very different, which is simply to ensure that any proceedings before you are constitutional and follow the law, and it would be my honor and my privilege to serve in that role.
Thank you. Judge Garnett, you were the lead prosecutor in United States versus Brooks. Mr. Brooks was charged with intentionally threatening to kill then-Senator Barack Obama. During the defendant's arraignment and bail hearing, you observed that he possibly suffered from mental health issues and asked the court to order a psychiatric exam and competency hearing for him. After it was determined that the defendant in fact suffered from severe mental illness, you coordinated with the Secret Service, Defense Counsel, Mr. Brooks' family, and state authorities to move to dismiss the case so that Mr. Brooks could receive the mental health treatment that he needed. We are becoming more sensitive and aware of the role of mental health in the commission of crime and circumstances leading up to it. Could you say a word about your thoughts of mental health in the context of today's system of justice?
Thank you, Senator Durbin. Our system of justice is predicated on the idea that everyone is ideal that everyone is supposed to be treated fairly, and that includes individuals who are suffering from mental illness. I have, as a prosecutor and as a judge, I have tried to make sure that individuals who elect to go to trial are mentally competent to do so. And when I sat on the Court of Appeals, our 3-judge panel also issued an opinion which made sure that individuals who elect to represent themselves are also competent to do so, or mentally competent to do so. I think it's an important principle in terms of making sure that everyone is treated fairly. And if I'm fortunate enough to be confirmed, I will continue to abide by that duty.
Thank you. Mr. Montero, we're limited in time here to the opening of 5 minutes, and I want to ask a question of Judge Thompson, but I want to also note for the record, your experience in your community, particularly helping young people, is one that really makes a positive impression on me. And I know that you're going to bring the same value system and dedication to justice to this new position if you're approved. So I thank you for being here today. Judge Thompson, you really have an amazing career on the bench, serving as State Superior Court Judge for 19 years and Juvenile Court Commissioner for 2 years, presiding over thousands of hearings, hundreds of civil and criminal bench trials, and over 150 criminal jury trials. That's an amazing record. I'd like to ask you, what lessons from your time as trial litigator and as judge will best serve you as a federal district court judge?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. When I was practicing law, one of the things that was abundantly important for me was to adhere to my Sixth Amendment duties, which was to make sure that I was the best attorney I could be for anyone I was representing. I made sure that I learned every aspect of the law. I made sure that I met with witnesses, including victims, because I wanted to be respectful whenever I saw them in court, and so that they would understand my role in the courtroom and not feel disrespected. When I transitioned onto the bench, before doing so, I met with some of my clients who were incarcerated, and I asked them what would have made the difference. And they said if people said what they meant and meant what they said, and if they could see me, and if they could hear me. If that had happened early on, I might not be sitting in this cell now. And they just asked me to be sure that I meet people where they are as opposed to where I am. I have continued to try to do that. I don't prejudge situations. It's a case-by-case scenario. And although I see and have heard over 150 jury trials, each trial starts anew for me. And I tell our jurors I cannot do my job with integrity unless there are participants in the process as well. So I have all deference to the rule of law, to equality and fairness and access.
Thanks, Judge. Senator Grassley?
Yeah, thank you. Ms. Morrison, Senator Durbin and I worked for years to get the criminal justice reform bill passed that we call step one or first step. Anyway, it may surprise you then with the question I'm going to ask you. Over the past few years, you praised progressive prosecutors like Rachel Rollins and Larry Krasner for their intent to, quote, reform current tough-on-crime practices, end of quote. You've written that the American criminal legal system has done, quote, decades of damage to communities, and you have suggested that the criminal justice system suffers from, quote-unquote, systemic defects. Given your substantial criticism of our judicial system, how would you plan to use your position as a district court judge to change the system if you're confirmed?
Thank you, Ranking Member Grassley, for that question. I don't recall some of the specific remarks that you referenced, but I certainly have spoken and written about the role that prosecutors can play in the work that I do, which is rectifying wrongful convictions. Typically, the cases that I work on with prosecutors are decades old. Sometimes the prosecutors who handle them were in law school or in high school when the cases were originally prosecuted. And I am grateful to many of them from both political parties and all around the country for working with me to do justice and to use DNA and other evidence that wasn't previously available to free my clients. My role as a judge would be very different if I am confirmed. It would simply be to preside over each case one at a time and to decide the law based on the facts presented to me.
For you also, you have been politically active throughout your life as a volunteer, advisor, and activist, and I can't find any fault with that. You have also said that, quote, a way to be a good citizen is to be politically active, end of quote. How has your political activity shaped your view of the law and the Constitution?
Thank you, Ranking Member Durbin. As I referenced in my opening, my grandfather came to this country when he was 4 years old, and I was his first grandchild, and we talked a lot about the privileges and responsibilities of citizenship. He came from a country that was not free, as America is. And I have volunteered on political campaigns when I've had the time as part of my duties as a citizen, but I recognize that the role of a judge is entirely different, and I certainly would abide by all of the canons of ethics and limit or stop my political activities in that regard.
Okay. For Mr. Monteiro, you have served as a member of the Prince George County School Board since 2018. In 2020, a committee of the board voted to end its relationship with the county police department and remove all officers from the schools. Do you believe that school boards should defund the police or remove officers from schools?
Thank you, Ranking Member Grassley, for the question. I voted against that resolution. I didn't think it was the right approach for our county.
Thank you for that. Another question for you. On your Twitter account, quote, unquote, Paul for PGC, you tweeted in support of protests and marches against guns and gun violence in 2018. For example, in reference to the March for Our Lives protest, you tweeted, quote, Frederick Douglass had it right, power concedes nothing without a demand. Can you assure the members of this committee that if you're confirmed as director, you will take any action to infringe, will not take any action to infringe on Second Amendment rights?
I can make that commitment, yes, Ranking Member Grassley.
It's Judge Garnett. You served as federal prosecutor for a number of years before you became a state court judge. Your cases covered a wide range, including prosecuting eco-terrorists, child exploitation, and fraud. What made you decide to pursue a career as Assistant Attorney General, and how has that experience shaped your approach as a judge?
Thank you, Senator Grassley. I am assuming you're referring to me being an assistant United States attorney, and I decided to pursue that career because I believe very much in justice and in making sure that people are treated fairly. When I was in law school, I spent a little of time in as a defense attorney and working with prosecutors across the aisle. I realized that we need diverse and varied experiences on both sides. And so that is one of the reasons why I pursued a career in the U.S. Attorney's Office. Thank you for your question.
I'll submit questions for right, answer right.
Thank you, Judge Grassley. Senator Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations to all of you. I enjoyed hearing about and meeting some of your family members. Ms. Morrison, which branch of government passes criminal statutes?
The legislative branch.
Yes, ma'am. And legislators, of course, I think we can agree, are elected by the people. Do you think it would be fair to say that the people in our legislators define criminality for our communities?
That's correct, Senator.
Okay. Do you think it's appropriate for a district attorney to decide to ignore criminal statutes and not to prosecute an entire line of cases?
Thank you, Senator, for that question.
You're welcome.
District attorneys, as you know, are accountable to the people and the citizens who elect them. And I know it has become an issue in elections about the extent to which district attorneys will use the resources of their office to focus on particular
Yes, ma'am.
categories.
And what do you think about that issue? Do you think it's, let me ask you again, do you think it's appropriate for prosecutors to say, I disagree with the legislature and the people, and I'm not going to prosecute an entire line of cases?
Senator, I think it is appropriate for prosecutors to evaluate each case that comes before them, and almost
Yes,
every
ma'am,
prosecutor.
but that's not what I'm asking. I know you, I mean, you're smart, okay? I can tell from your resume. Let me say it again. The people elect their legislators. Legislators say on behalf of the people, this is a crime which society will not tolerate without punishment. Do you think that it's okay for prosecutors to say, I disagree and I'm not going to prosecute an entire line of cases, I don't care who is charged? Do you agree with that?
Senator, I agree that prosecutors have the legal option to use the flexibility
No,
given
but
to them.
when they exercise that option, do you agree with that?
I think it would depend on the circumstance under which they're exercising it and what the rationale was for their
Well, what are the circumstances where it's okay to do that?
So I think prosecutors in this country work very difficult jobs under very demanding conditions.
I'll stipulate to that, but we have prosecutors who are saying, to hell with the legislature and the people, we're not going to prosecute an entire line of cases. And I think my question is pretty straightforward. Do you agree with that or disagree with it?
Senator, I have never worked as a prosecutor. I have.
Yes, ma'am, but you've read about it.
Yes, sir.
What's going on? Do you agree with it or disagree with it?
Senator, I don't think I can give a categorical yes or no to that because I think it would depend on the
I think you just answered my question. What do you think about the job being done by District Attorney Krasner? I believe you worked for the District Attorney's re-election or election. Do you think he's doing a good job or a bad job?
Senator, I did not actually work on District Attorney Krasner's campaign. I've been an adversary of that
I apologize. Do you think he's doing a good job or a bad job?
Senator, I don't think it would be appropriate as a judicial nominee for me to comment on the performance of an elected official.
Why not?
Because there is always a chance that a case could come before me in which someone has, say, a prior conviction from Philadelphia who's then prosecuted in New York, and any commentary that I made on that office could be grounds for...
Isn't that convenient? Do you think judges, apparently you think that prosecutors should be able to say, we're not going to prosecute a line of cases and a group of crimes despite the solemn expression of a legislative will? Do you think judges should be able to do that? Say, I don't agree with this criminal statute, I'm not going to prosecute, I'm not going to hear cases for any of them.
No, Senator, judges do not prosecute cases, and
I know that, but do you think a judge should say, I don't want to hear, I'm going to dismiss all these cases because I don't agree with the criminal statute? I think you understand my question, Ms. Morrison.
I do, Senator, and I would, I'm trying to recall how you phrased the question. I would agree with you, or at least my position would be that judges cannot refuse to adjudicate or hear a case and ignore the will of the
But district attorneys can.
As executives, they are granted with greater discretion. For example, district attorneys day in and day out
A whole line of cases.
complaints from the police that they then evaluate based on the evidence.
Do you
and
think a
decide
district
to
attorney, it's appropriate for a district attorney saying, look, in the name of social justice, I'm not going to prosecute armed robberies anymore? You agree with that?
Senator, I would stand on my previous answer. I think it would depend on the circumstance. I'm not aware of any district attorney in the country that
How
has
can I
said.
vote for you if you won't answer a straightforward question like that, Counselor?
Senator, I would hope that you would consider the entirety of my record and my qualifications and the work that I've
The
done.
problem is I have. And I see all these comments you've made in favor of the district attorneys who, in the name of social justice, and you've spoken glowingly of all of them, and now you won't answer my question about it. You say it's inappropriate. And I just don't, I think it's really appropriate. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Kennedy. Senator Cruz?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Morrison, you urge this committee to look at the whole of your record. I will confess the whole of your record is deeply disturbing. Across this country, Americans are horrified at skyrocketing crime rates, at skyrocketing homicide rates, at skyrocketing burglary rates, at skyrocketing carjacking rates. And all of those are the direct result of the policies you've spent your entire lifetime advocating. You have repeatedly praised steps the new, quote, progressive prosecutors have taken, refusing to prosecute violent crime and letting violent criminals go. And as a result, far too many innocent people have died. Now, just a minute ago, you gave Senator Kennedy a very lawyerly answer. He asked you about Larry Krasner, the elected district attorney of Philadelphia, and I listened very carefully to your answer. You said, Senator, I didn't work on his campaign. Well, Ms. Morrison, that answer is technically right, but I assume you read the questionnaire you submitted to this committee, and on this committee, you identified yourself as an advisor to his transition committee. So you may not have worked on his campaign, but you advised him in his transition committee. For those who don't know, Larry Krasner was elected district attorney in Philadelphia. He was backed by George Soros, who has backed prosecutors across the country releasing violent criminals. According to the Philadelphia Inquirer, upon taking office, Krasner immediately fired 31 veteran prosecutors. An additional 39 veterans of the office resigned in the years following. Now it's reported that over 60% of the office consists of less experienced junior attorneys with less than 4 years' experience. Ms. Morrison, is Philadelphia today more safe or less safe than when Mr. Krasner became district attorney?
Thank you, Senator, for that question, and I apologize if my answer to Senator Kennedy's question was in any way misleading. I certainly did serve as an advisor to District Attorney Krasner.
Okay, good. Let's talk about, is Philadelphia more safe today than it was before he was elected?
The issue on which I worked specifically...
I have a specific question. Is Philadelphia more safe today than when he was elected?
Senator, respectfully, I have not...
That's a yes or no?
I do not consider myself an expert on crime statistics.
You have no view?
Safety. On Philadelphia, I can certainly talk about the cases that I've worked on in Philadelphia.
So you advise this transition team. Let me ask you, when you were advising him on his, and by the way, is the murder rate today in Philadelphia higher or lower than when Mr. Krasner was elected?
Senator, I do not know because I have not studied those statistics.
So you were part of the transition team but didn't really care about the results. Well, let me answer it for you. When Mr. Krasner became district attorney, there were 315 homicides citywide. How many do you think there are this past year?
I know the murder rate is up nationally, Senator, but I'm not familiar with the specifics.
It went from 315 to 562, almost twice the 2017 number, the highest in over 60 years. Let me ask you, is that a progressive approach? You call these progressive prosecutors who let violent criminals go, who then murder innocent people. Is that progressive, 562 people murdered in Philadelphia?
Senator, I take a strong interest in the successful prosecution of murder cases because
Okay,
so many-
I actually don't believe your record reflects that, so let's look elsewhere, because you actually make a business of supporting these soft-on-crime prosecutors that release violent criminals. You also were on the transition committee for Los Angeles District Attorney George Gascon, who came to office in 2020. Like Krasner, like other Soros DAs, they come in to let violent criminals go, and they do it. And those violent criminals murder innocent people. Do you have any idea what the murder rate was in Los Angeles County in 2021?
Senator, again, I'm aware in the wake of the COVID pandemic, the murder rate is up nationally, and I don't know the specifics.
So you serve on transition teams for DAs, but you're not concerned with the murder rate. Well, it was 397 murders in 2021. That was 11.8% higher than the year before, which was 355, and it was 53.9% higher than the 2019 total before Mr. Gascon was elected. That was 258. Why is it that you keep being part of the transition team, helping advise district attorneys on how to release violent criminals, and you're the head of the Innocence Project? The Innocence Project actually does good work for people who are wrongfully convicted. They should be released. But do you care about the innocent people who are murdered because you keep advising people who put policies in place that result in more innocent people being murdered?
I see the time is up, but I'm happy to answer the senator's question if the chair will permit. Senator Cruz, I have worked for 20 years on cases involving some of the most horrific crimes imaginable, murders and rapes. Some of my own clients were murder victims' family members. They lost their loved ones and were wrongly convicted of killing them. And much of the work that I have done with DNA and other evidence has helped identify—
Ms. Morrison, you're not answering my question. Why do you keep advising radical district attorneys who let violent criminals go and result in homicide rates skyrocketing? Do you care about the innocent people being killed because of the policies you're implementing?
Absolutely, Senator. And to clarify, my role in those transition committees were only on the issue of what's called conviction integrity, not the front-end prosecution policies, but on the review of old cases. That is the limited capacity on which I worked. I played no role in formulating the front-end policies, but it is because when the wrong person is convicted of murder, the person who's actually committed the crime isn't brought to justice that I think the work connects.
Sadly, your nomination is part of a pattern from this administration, and Democrats in the Senate, if they follow their pattern, will vote to convict yet another judge who will let more violent criminals go.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask you a question?
Of course, Senator Kennedy.
Are these witnesses under oath?
Well, sure, you know that.
Okay. No, I didn't see you swear them in.
I did. I promise you I did.
I'm sorry, I missed that.
Senator Lee?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I've got a list in front of me of the charges for which the default for Rachel Rollins was to not charge. Trespassing, shoplifting, larceny under $250, disorderly conduct, disturbing the peace, receiving stolen property, minor driving offenses, breaking and entering, wanton and malicious destruction of property, threats excluding domestic violence, minor in possession of alcohol, drug possession with intent to distribute, a standalone resisting arrest charge combined with only charges that fall under the list of other charges declining to prosecute. Not all of those are charges that, as to which the failure to bring charges would be a problem in a particular case with particular circumstances. A decision up front not to bring charges when accusations come up like that is a problem. And so your support of this approach is deeply concerning to me. I mean, these are things that in many instances are themselves violent acts. Breaking and entering is a violent act. You've got to break in order to enter, and it's also the type of offense that inevitably, by virtue of the way it's committed, leads to violence. Would you agree with that?
Senator, I absolutely agree that breaking and entering under certain statutes is a violent act and certainly could lead to violence, and I've seen that in my cases as well, sir.
Okay, so that concerns me. Your support of this approach and of Rachel Rollins is deeply concerning to me. It's also concerning to me. Been looking at this piece you wrote about 3.5 years ago in the New York Times, in which you referred to the fact that you say prosecutorial misconduct taints thousands of cases. I don't see any empirical support for that. Can you give me parameters around that? Are you talking about in the history of time since 1791? Or, talking about in New York, in the entire country? What does that mean? Thousands of cases over what time period and in what jurisdiction?
Thank you, Senator Lee, for that question. The piece that you're referring to, I believe, was an op-ed I wrote for the New York Times about prosecutorial accountability and prosecutorial discipline. I don't remember the specific quotation that you're referring to, but I can tell you that there are some reliable estimates from the National Registry of Exonerations, which is a project of the University of California, Irvine, and the University of Michigan, that has systematically reviewed proven wrongful convictions reversed by the courts that involve prosecutorial misconduct. And so based on that particular study...
Okay, but again, over what time and in what jurisdiction? If it's boundless, if you're talking about the entire country, the entire history of the country, I don't doubt that. If you're talking about a specific year and or a particular jurisdiction, I find it troubling that you'd throw that in there without defining it. I assume you would agree with me that it's a bad thing to sow seeds of distrust in the criminal justice system unless you're ready to back them up.
I would agree with that, Senator.
And don't you think that raises that concern if you're saying thousands, prosecutorial misconduct taints thousands of cases? You can understand how a reader of the New York Times or any other publication, if they just read that, in context, could think that you mean thousands of cases per year in the state of New York, which, if true, would be a significant thing, and if true, would also be something that you would need to prove or establish. If not true, and people had that impression, what effect do you think that might have on people's respect for law enforcement?
Thank you, Senator. The piece of which you're referring, I think, if I recall correctly, made clear that cases of prosecutorial misconduct are a very small percentage of cases prosecuted nationally. The thousands represent fewer than 0.1% or even less of all the cases prosecuted.
Yeah, but you're assuming that you know the numerator and the denominator. I don't know how you make that claim. If you say that they prosecute, what did you say, less than 0.1% of all instances of prosecutorial misconduct. How do you know that? Your microphone's not on.
My apologies. Senator, again, the space constraints in that op-ed did not permit me to list all the sourcing, but there are a number of studies along those lines. And the big picture question that you're asking is, I think, when our system responds to the very small number of cases involving misconduct, it builds trust in the justice system because of the importance of getting it right. And I am proud to have worked with many prosecutors from all political parties and all ideologies who have taken it upon themselves to improve the justice system. In particular, in Senator Cruz's home state of Texas, there was a law passed in the name of one of my former clients to try to make it easier for the wrongly accused to get access to exculpatory evidence because of proven misconduct in that case, and it was unanimously passed by a primarily Republican legislature.
Okay. I don't dispute, and I'm wrapping up, Mr. Chairman, I don't dispute that prosecutorial misconduct is a serious thing, that it happens, that it needs to be taken seriously, that it's unacceptable when it does happen. It does concern me when people throw out broad statements like this without backing them up, without defining them jurisdictionally or temporally. And that coupled with your support of Rachel Rollins and her approach has me very concerned that as a life-tenured Article III judge, if confirmed, You'd be dealing with these cases every day, many times each day. If you take an approach that starts from the default proposition that the system is bad and that a lot of these charges should not even be brought, that's deeply troubling to me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We now have in order Senator Blumenthal, Hawley, Padilla, and King. And a message from God. We'll start with Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Morrison, would you begin with a view that prosecutors are bad and their cases are riddled with error as a default position, as Senator Lee has just suggested?
No, Senator, and in fact, I would estimate that about 1/3 to 1/2 of my clients who've been freed through DNA and other evidence would not be free today were it not for conscientious prosecutors around the country who worked with me to uncover the truth. And I am very proud of my working relationships with them, and I think the trust that we've collectively built into the system as a result.
I was a prosecutor in a former life, a federal prosecutor, and then I was state attorney general for 20 years. And I will tell you, and I think most prosecutors feel the same way, nothing outraged me more than prosecutorial misconduct. Nothing was more debilitating and degrading to our system of justice than a federal or a state prosecutor purposefully doing injustice. And I would hope that my colleagues on the dais would agree. And the reason is quite simply, there's an added responsibility on the part of a prosecutor to make sure that justice is done, win or lose. I think it was Justice Jackson who said something like, a prosecutor wins when justice is done. Not necessarily with a conviction, but when justice is done. And I assume you would agree with that basic sentiment.
I do, Senator.
And let me ask you, in assisting prosecutors' office, what did you view your role as being? What was your service to them?
Thank you, Senator. So I have one particular area of expertise that I've developed in my 20 years at the Innocence Project, among some related areas, but primarily it's the reinvestigation of old cases, specifically from a time when DNA evidence was not available. So I have trained prosecutors in the responsible use of forensic science, in a practice of jointly reinvestigate cases called conviction integrity reviews, where we put aside the adversarial model and go back and interview witnesses together, share files and information, and it's a truly collaborative effort. I have also done some training on discovery practices, which is the practice through which prosecutors fulfill their constitutional duty to provide evidence favorable to the accused. I have not been involved in shaping front-end policies in misdemeanor cases or lower-level felonies for today's prosecutors, though I'm aware that that's the subject of much debate.
Would it be fair to say that you try to inculcate or give guidance as to how to review cases to assure that justice was done in particular cases?
That's correct, Senator. And I should also add that I have been occasionally involved, though not as an advocate, but to assist prosecutors in the re-prosecution of old cases. So in a number of our cases, the DNA evidence that we uncovered was able to identify the person who actually committed the crime. And so I have provided copies of my files or records or factual information to assist in the re-prosecution, resulting in some of those individuals now currently serving life sentences for murder cases and related matters.
Thank you very much. Mr. Montero, could you talk a little bit about why it's important to prioritize community-based responses to hate crimes in addition to traditional investments in investigations and prosecutions?
Thank you for the question, Senator Blumenthal. It's important because, and CRS in particular, has the ability to look at patterns or respond to requests from communities that see certain groups or parts of the community having issues where their rights are not respected, or patterns of bullying or harassment that before the commission of a crime or a hate incident, CRS can work to resource and at all points respecting the voice of the local community and local stakeholders help them work through conflicts that, if left unaddressed, may result in crime.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, my time has expired. I wish I had more time to talk to these superlatively well-qualified nominees. I think they represent the best of our profession. I thank you for your willingness to serve, and I look forward to supporting you. Thank you very much. And I yield to my colleague from Missouri, Senator Hawley.
Thank you very much, Senator. And thanks to all the nominees for being here today. Congratulations on your nominations. Ms. Morrison, if I could start with you. We've been talking, I think, today about a December 2019 article that you wrote, an opinion piece entitled "Prosecutors Can Right Past Wrongs If Only the System Lets Them." I assume you remember that piece, just a couple of years ago.
Yes, I was a co-author of that piece, Senator.
In that piece, you praised, and I'm quoting you now, a growing cohort of prosecutors seeking a new approach to justice. And then you go on to describe those prosecutors as seeking to, and I'm quoting you again, reform current tough-on-crime practices, and, still quoting you, restore trust in the criminal legal system as a whole. I want to talk to you about your view on tough-on-crime practices and why you're opposed to them. Just a few things to make sure that we're on a level set here. Are you familiar with the fact that homicides were up 30% from 2020 to 2021 in this country, the largest increase ever recorded in American history?
Senator, I don't know that I can vouch for that precise statistic, but I am aware that there are some studies showing that homicides are up across the country.
In 2020, St. Louis, in my home state, saw its highest murder rate in 50 years. Carjackings were up in D.C., to take another example, from 142 in 2019 to 426 last year. Carjackings quadrupled in Philadelphia since 2015. In Chicago, they're up from 303 in 2014 to 1,800 last year. They're also skyrocketing in St. Louis County, and St. Charles County, in my home state, all in the greater St. Louis area. And these are just a few of the statistics that show the dramatic increase in crime, in violent crime, in assaults, all across this country. You praise in your piece, where you decry a tough-on-crime practice, you praise someone, a prosecutor in my state in particular, St. Louis Circuit Attorney Kim Gardner. Do you remember praising her in this piece?
Thank you, Senator Hawley. Yes, the focus of that piece and the specific aspect of Ms. Gardner's work that we were discussing was her work on a murder case that long predated her tenure, in which she found evidence that the person was actually innocent and had gone to court to try to overturn that conviction.
Well, you praise her as the St. Louis Circuit Attorney, so let's just talk a little bit about her record that you saw fit to praise. In 2020, in the midst of rioting that convulsed the city of St. Louis, police officers were shot at. A retired police captain, David Dorn, was murdered. Rioters threw rocks and gasoline and frozen water bottles at police officers. Firefighters were assaulted and blocked from responding to fires that looters set across the city. Businesses were burned, their windows shattered. Innocent civilians were assaulted. The police, over the course of 2 nights of rioting, arrested 36 separate individuals. They sent them to the prosecutor's office, the one that you praise, Kim Gardner, as a model. And do you know how many of those 36 that she prosecuted?
I do not, Senator.
No, the answer is 0. She released all 36. I've got the news articles right here. Circuit Attorney Kim Gardner says that, in fact, she confirmed 36 people arrested Sunday and Monday night for rioting and looting have all been released from custody. What Kim Gardner did instead is blame the police. She said that the police were the ones at fault. The police hadn't given her the evidence. The police hadn't provided what she was seeking. This is her quote: "We need essential evidence from the police." This despite the fact that the police confirmed they had brought these people who were arrested in the course of doing the things I just described: assaulting police officers, throwing rocks and gasoline and frozen water bottles, assaulting firefighters, burning businesses. And she didn't charge any. 36 people arrested, brought to her, evidence presented to her, and she releases them. Now, is that the kind of approach that you stand by and think is appropriate for prosecutors to take?
Senator Hawley, the focus of the piece in which I mentioned Ms. Gardner that you're referencing was the case of a man named Lamar Johnson. And what I found particularly heartening about the events that took place after we wrote that essay is that the Missouri legislature, I believe Republican in both chambers who sponsored the bill, changed the law so that Ms. Gardner could successfully file a motion for a new trial on behalf of the individual referenced, and we were joined by the Cato Institute and others in supporting that bill. So I agree with you, there are many issues of great public debate about how we should best oppose crime and public safety, but in the particular case I was writing about, it appeared to reflect a broader consensus about how to handle wrongful convictions.
But with all due respect, that's not how you describe her in this piece. You describe her as part of a cohort of prosecutors who seek a new approach to justice, and in particular seek to reform current tough-on-crime practices. Now, I do agree with that characterization. I think you accurately have described the behavior of prosecutors in my state. They have reformed tough-on-crime practices. In fact, I'd say they're pro-crime. They're pro-criminal practices, and we're seeing the result of those in my state. And unfortunately, the result is people who are the most vulnerable, people who can't afford private security, people who aren't connected and wealthy, they're the ones who suffer. They're the ones whose children aren't safe. They're the ones whose cars are smashed. They're the ones whose businesses get looted. They're the ones whose neighborhoods you can't go out and walk on the street. And they're suffering right now in my state and all across this country because prosecutors won't do their job. You praise these prosecutors as taking a new approach, and I agree with you. It is a new approach, but it's a disastrous approach. And unfortunately, for that reason alone, I cannot support your nomination, and I will not support the nominations of judges or any other individuals sent to us by this administration who are soft on crime and soft on criminals. Frankly, it is a pattern with this administration, and it is one that has got to end. And for those reasons, I will oppose you and anybody else that the president sends up to us who does not understand the necessity of the rule of law. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Padilla.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to ask questions of some of the other nominees before us that I don't think I've had a chance to take and respond to questions. And obviously, there's two Californians that I'm proud of that are before us. My first question is for Judge Thompson. Judge Thompson, you've had a trailblazing judicial career which started nearly 20 years ago, with you becoming the first Black woman to win election to serve as a Superior Court judge in Alameda County. Since then, you've ruled on thousands of matters and presided over more than 150 trials. Your experience as a judge is deep, and your commitment to fairness and the rule of law is evident from your record. Just like for you to share with the committee, over the course of the 20 years as judge, I'm sure you've drawn inspiration from, have been encouraged by some of your fellow jurists. Can you talk about some of the best qualities of judges that you've tried to emulate, and more broadly, maybe who's maybe served as a role model or who you've been inspired by?
Thank you, Senator Padilla. It is difficult to name those who have had the most impact, but those who I had direct mentoring from showed me a pathway to judicial restraint, to temperament, and to kindness and compassion. And that was Judge Joan Cartwright, Judge Martin Jenkins, and also Judge Clint White and Thelton Henderson. They are trailblazers in and of themselves. They have come to their jobs and always shown a great deal of compassion to the people that they serve. They serve with a firm hand, but they understand also their commitment to their community. They remain accessible and they remain humble. That robe does not overtake who they are as an individual. They are still seen in their community. A judge who particularly touched me was District Court Judge Myron Thompson. He sits in the federal court in Alabama. I had the pleasure of meeting him, and I was amazed at the amount of time he took with me to share our history, to walk me through his own career, the fact that he had polio and he never let that in any way slow him down, and the fact that he lived at a time where a lot of the options that are available to me were not available to a lot of people. That courage was amazing to me. And the fact that he was still so humble, so approachable, and a student of the law and has not stopped. So those are the people that I admire the most.
Thank you. Same question for Judge Garnett. You've had tremendous amount of experience both at the state and at the federal level. Any lessons learned or characteristics of other judges that you choose to emulate?
Thank you, Senator Padilla. I talked a little bit about this in my introduction, but I had the privilege of clerking for Judge Barry Ted Moskowitz in the Southern District for a period of a year, and we worked on federal cases. And I was able to work closely with him. I observed how he treated the litigants who appeared before him. He was patient, and he would listen to their arguments and make sure that they felt that they were heard. He was incredibly intelligent, or he is incredibly intelligent, and understands the issues that are presented. He mentored and nurtured his law clerks and made us part of the process. And he diligently researched the law and applied it fairly and impartially. He has a wonderful sense of humor and a wonderful temperament. In each day that I spend on the bench, I try to emulate the wonderful qualities that he has. Thank you for your question.
Thank you very much. Final question again for Judge Thompson. You were appointed by Alameda Superior Court judges to serve as a juvenile court commissioner in the Dependency and Delinquency Court. Can you just briefly describe some of the work and any lessons learned in the area of juvenile justice?
Thank you, Senator Padilla, for that question. My role in the juvenile court as a commissioner and then later as the presiding judge of the juvenile court was the most amazing experience I had. It was my chance to serve my community in a totally different way and to be able to help shape my next door neighbor. I was able to provide resources to students, mentor young people who had been abused, neglected, or exploited, and to provide them with services that they may not have had otherwise. Having been in foster care myself, I was able to meet each of them where they were. I was able to see what a lot of people couldn't see in terms of the challenges that they may have and the resources that were no longer available to them because they were separated from their family for whatever reason. And when I had the pleasure of working for the coordinating council and meeting Judge Gordon Martin, and he brought me under his tutelage to talk about the significance that a judicial officer can have on a young person's life, particularly those who don't have access to professionals and to judges, but just to be present and to be able to meet them from a positive position as opposed to a negative, and to pull that out of them. And from that, a documentary, which you may have in the red, where we were able to take young people from the juvenile court who we saw something in them. They became emergency medical service providers. Some are firefighters and others are paramedics, because I could see that they actually did have compassion and they did want to give back to their community. They just didn't know how.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Cotton.
Ms. Morrison, in 1993, a serial rapist and murderer named Liddell Lee entered the home of Deborah Reese, a newlywed and a mother of a 7-year-old in Jacksonville, Arkansas. He beat her 36 times with a tire thumper, and then he finished the job by strangling her to death. 2 years later, he was convicted by a jury and sentenced to death based on eyewitness testimony and his possession of her stolen property. After his arrest, he was also connected to other crimes, and he was convicted of 2 rapes, charged in 2 more rapes and another murder. The prosecutors decided against pursuing that additional murder charge since he was already sentenced to death. After more than 20 years, including numerous frivolous appeals and motions for delay, Lee was finally brought to justice in 2017 when his death sentence was carried out with approval from the Supreme Court. You accused Arkansas of, quote, rushing through the execution, even though it had taken 20 years at that point, and you tried to get even more delay. And even after Lee was executed, you continued to try to cast doubt on his guilt with new DNA tests, which proved inconclusive. Do you believe that Liddell Lee committed the rapes and murders he was accused and convicted of committing?
Thank you, Senator Cotton. As you indicated, I became co-counsel for Mr. Lee about 2 weeks prior to his execution at the request of some Arkansas attorneys who wanted me to evaluate a claim for DNA evidence that had never been litigated in the courts. None of Mr. Lee's prior attorneys before his execution date was set had ever asked the court to allow post-conviction DNA testing, even though your home state has a law which provides for it. And in fact, one of Mr. Lee's attorneys later admitted that he suffered from a serious alcohol and drug problem and did not provide Mr. Lee with the representation that he was constitutionally entitled to. So I was involved simply in his request for DNA testing. As you know, we were unsuccessful. After Mr. Lee was executed, I became the lawyer along with several others for his surviving sister, who wanted to uncover the truth and see if her brother had been executed for a crime he didn't commit. As you indicated, we then went to court and actually got the agreement of Jacksonville, Arkansas officials to test the DNA in that case. Some of the results were inconclusive, but notably there was male DNA on the murder weapon that did not come from Mr. Lee, which was the weapon that had been used to murder Ms. Reese. It does remain an open investigation, and I continue to represent Mr. Lee's sister, so I'm afraid I cannot comment on the merits of the case, but that is the history and my role.
So you said as recently as last May, 9 months ago, that those DNA tests were incomplete and partial, as they had always been. And he was not convicted at any point on the basis of DNA evidence. He was convicted on the basis of eyewitness testimony and his possession of Ms. Reese's stolen property. So I will ask you again a simple question. Do you believe that Liddell Lee is guilty of the murder and the rapes he was convicted of?
Senator, you're correct. Incomplete and partial is different than inconclusive. They have pretty precise scientific meanings. I don't mean to mince words, but I've been trained by scientists, as many lawyers are not, to be careful in the use of those terms. I do continue to represent Mr. Lee's sister, and it would be unfortunately, I cannot, in my role as an attorney, comment on the merits, and certainly on my former client's guilt or innocence. I can tell you that there is a significant amount of compelling evidence in favor of his innocence. We would not have taken the case.
Compelling evidence that court somehow overlooked for 22 years until he was executed?
Senator, I have represented many individuals who were exonerated by DNA, who lost dozens of appeals in courts because DNA was not available, and eyewitness identification, which you reference, is actually the single leading proven cause of wrongful conviction. So certainly some of those convictions are rightful ones, some are wrongful, and we have learned that it's through DNA that we can...
Holly Lodge-Meyer is the prosecuting attorney who tried this case. She was a prosecutor for 27 years. It was the only death penalty case she ever pursued because it was so heinous. Do you think you know better than she does about Liddell Lee's guilt or innocence?
Senator, I'm sure that Ms. Lodge worked very hard to pursue what she thought was a just result, as have many prosecutors who, through no fault of their own, ended up wrongfully convicting innocent people. And I think what we can hope from our system is that all of us as human beings will take an open and fair look at the evidence, including new technology that was not available to Ms. Lodge.
As he walked to the execution chamber on the night of his execution, he looked at the warden and smirked and said, "This ain't happening, y'all are taking me back." Are you proud that you encourage such defiance in convicted murderers?
Senator, I don't believe that anything in my career has ever encouraged defiance or disrespect for the process, and I know that Mr. Lee maintained his actual innocence until his execution.
Would you like to say anything today to Deborah Reese's family?
Thank you, Senator, for that opportunity. There is no question that Ms. Reese suffered a horrible death that no one in this world should suffer, and my heart goes out to her and her family for their loss, and I only hope that the right person was convicted and executed, because the contrary is unimaginable.
Anything you'd like to say to the 3 women who Liddell Lee raped?
Senator, I can tell you that he did maintain his innocence of those offenses as well, and I certainly do not in any way intend to disrespect what they went through. I have known and worked with many survivors of sexual assault, some of whom are very dear to me, and what they went through is unimaginable, and I hope our justice system will always do what we can to get it right in those cases.
Thank you, Senator Cotton. Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you, Chairman. Let me just open by saying that I've been the U.S. Attorney for my state and the Attorney General, and Rhode Island is one of the states where the AG has full criminal jurisdiction. There are only 3. So I've been involved with prosecutions for a long time, and I want to say that in both of those offices, we viewed capable, determined defense counsel as a real asset. We were proud to be part of a process for adjudication, and we understood that effective representation for the individuals who we were prosecuting was a vital part of the system. In fact, we looked to the defense bar for hires from time to time. It's not, war of prosecutor against defense. It's a joint mission to a process that the world looks at and can be proud of. During the course of my time as Attorney General, it became apparent that we had in jail a person, indeed a police officer, previously convicted of murder, who was in fact actually innocent. And we discovered that because the actual murderer had a crisis of principle and came in through a lawyer to confess. We found out about this, I want to say, on a Thursday evening, if I remember correctly. And we worked with the lawyer through the weekend to double check the allegations of the new confessor, because as you know, from time to time, people confess who aren't actually guilty. I don't know why they do it, but it happens. So we had to eliminate that prospect. We were in court the following Monday to explain to the judge what was going on, and at a hearing the following Wednesday, the police officer was released from prison and returned to his life. So I have lived the experience of innocence. Nothing was done wrong by the state's prosecutors in that case. The evidence led them and the jury in a particular direction, and the actually guilty party was not known. So I just want to say that I appreciate the work that you've done to pursue those post-conviction innocence claims. It really made a big difference to this police officer's life in Rhode Island. You have Ms. Morrison, you have two very complimentary letters, one from the Republican district attorney in Tarrant County, Texas, and the other from the senior vice president for legal studies at my frequent nemesis, the Cato Institute. Could you explain a little bit how Ms. Wilson and Ms. Neely came to have this experience of you that caused them to write these two very complimentary letters? And could I ask that the two letters be made a part of the record?
Thank you, Senator Whitehouse. And I do remember the case in Rhode Island. The exonerated man, Scott Hornoff, is someone I know well, and how commendably your office responded when that very unexpected and truly miraculous confession from the real murderer came in. In terms of the letters you referenced, I worked with Criminal District Attorney Wilson on a reinvestigation of a murder case over the course of many years on behalf of a client of mine named John Nolly. She is, as you noted in her letter, a Republican former judge, and had a real commitment to seeking the truth and doing justice in that case. And I worked very productively with her staff and with her personally over the course of 4 years until she went to court and dismissed charges against my client on the grounds that he was actually innocent. And Mr. Neely from the Cato Institute and I came to know each other through our shared work on prosecutorial accountability and reform. We are people from very different backgrounds, but share a common commitment to due process, and I'm proud to consider him a colleague.
And in your view, is it tough on crime? Does being tough on crime include convicting the innocent?
No, Senator, it does not. And
given that we've had experience that people who are actually innocent have in fact been convicted, we've seen it over and over, and Officer Hornoff was an example in Rhode Island. In terms of being tough on crime, does anything about being tough on crime require overlooking evidence of actual innocence by somebody who's been convicted and incarcerated?
No, Senator, it does not.
Well, I just want to thank you for your work in this space and appreciate very much that you are a nominee, and I look forward to supporting your and all the panel's confirmations.
Thanks, Senator Whitehouse. And Senator Blackburn's up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to each of you, congratulations on your nomination. And we appreciate that you are here for us today. And I think you can realize by the questions that you've heard. Senator Blumenthal and I had a press conference this morning, so I was upstairs in my office and streaming away and listening to some of your interactions. But I think the point comes across that each of us, as we represent people, we are talking to moms and dads, and in my case, Tennesseans every weekend. Crime is at the top of the heap. They are so concerned about crime in the streets and safety of their children and their families, and the positions you're taking and the nominations you have for a federal bench is something that we take our responsibility very seriously to make certain that we have judges that are going to abide by the Constitution, who believe in the rule of law, and are going to hold steadfast in that as they carry out their duties. Just a couple of questions. And Judge Thompson, I'd like to come to you. I want to ask you about the Kevin Sawyer case, which was a 1997 trial. He had 17 sexual assault charges for raping, stalking, attacking 5 different women. And I know at least in one of those, it was DNA evidence that tied him back to the attack. And in defending your client, you argued that DNA testing methods give unreliable evidence, and you plan to challenge that testing method during a separate court hearing. So if you're confirmed, then you will likely handle criminal cases where DNA evidence is going to be crucial in proving that case. So given your prior statements, how can prosecutors know that you're going to be fair and impartial when it comes to making those decisions on the admissibility of DNA evidence?
Thank you for that question. That was perhaps over 25 years ago when I was
97.
When I was a attorney in private practice. At that time, DNA evidence was fairly new. And at that time, I remember talking to Judge Clint White and letting him know that I do paragraphs, not graphs. And I had tried to stay as far away from science as I could when I went to law school. But he said, you have to attack your fear. Read, learn, and teach. And that's what I did. So I immersed myself in the study of DNA evidence. And at that time, there still were some areas that were not clear, that the science had not been fully tested. And my duty as a Sixth Amendment lawyer was to provide my client with all of the legally available defenses. When I'm representing someone back in those years, it was not my case, it was not my accusation, but it was my duty to represent the person I was charged with representing in court.
Yeah, but what I want to know is prosecutors are going to come to you with the DNA evidence. In many of these cases that involve rape, involve assault against women, that is used. So how will you approach that? How are prosecutors going to know you're fair and impartial on that?
Thank you for that question, Senator Blackburn. I've been on the bench now for 20 years, and I have handled some of the most egregious cases you can imagine, many of which have even been sexual assault cases. Probably one of the most violent sexual assault cases involving human trafficking was heard in my courtroom. The facts underlying that case are too horrific to share in this audience. The people of the state of California have reaffirmed my position on the bench every 6 years without challenge.
Okay, I feel like you're still not giving me a direct answer, but I do want to move on, and I would appreciate a response in writing on that.
Absolutely.
I think that's vitally important. Mr. Monteiro, I want to ask you about your support for March for Our Lives. They oppose the Supreme Court's decision in District of Columbia versus Heller, and you've tweeted support for March for Our Lives. And so do you share March for Our Lives' view that Heller is a dangerous precedent that must be overturned?
Thank you for the question, Senator Blackburn. And I believe that tweet was from a local campaign Twitter account in 2018. The CRS certainly doesn't weigh in on issues of any judicial decisions or legislative
I understand
considerations.
that, but it does speak to your philosophy and your approach.
Yes, absolutely, Senator Blackburn. And Ranking Member Grassley asked me about my commitment to not doing anything in this role that would infringe on anyone's Second Amendment rights.
Okay.
And I made that commitment under oath.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have some other questions I'll submit for written answers.
Thank you, Senator Blackburn. I understand Senator Tillis is in a virtual position waiting to be recognized. Senator Tillis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I know the vote's been called, so I will be brief. I do share some of the concerns expressed by some of my colleagues with the judicial nominations, but I would like to ask Mr. Montero a couple of questions. One, Mr. Montero, congratulations on being a school board member. I think it's probably one of the most difficult jobs anybody could volunteer to do. So thank you for being willing to serve. I know that in answer to Senator Grassley's question about the resolution removing police officers from schools, you said that you voted against that and you thought that any strategy moving forward would require a thoughtful approach. Can you give me an idea of what a thoughtful approach would look like and what you think under what scenario you think removing law enforcement from schools could be a demonstrably good idea?
Thank you for the question, Senator. And yes, one of the reasons I did not support that resolution was because I went to almost every principal in the county asking for their view on whether school resource officers were helpful or a positive influence on their school setting. And I couldn't find a single principal who thought school resource officers were a danger. I believe then and now we actually had a very successful SRO program in our county schools, given the challenges that we faced for different reasons. So I thought we had a good model of where school resource officers, in concert with our county police department, could provide a resource that was helpful to keeping school environments safe in a way that did not cast any negative effect on students. We had so many reports where the SROs were actually trusted by students. Students would confide in them and help them anticipate challenges to avoid violent fights or other activities that were illegal in a school setting. I regret that I was on the losing side of that debate, but I thought the model we had in our county was a good example of what could work well.
Well, that's good. So it sounds like to me, 15 years ago, before I entered politics, I was a PTA president at a high school that had one of the reasons I became more active than just a volunteer in the PTA to be PTA president is we were having a serious problem with school crime. And I found that the resource officers, the principals work very closely together. And I think they're a positive influence in schools. I infer from your question, you agree with that.
Yes, a well-managed and well-run SRO program can be a great benefit to a school system.
Thank you. Did have a question. I know you've worked in two prior administrations, one Democrat, one Republican. Tell me how that experience and other work experience qualifies you for the job you're being considered for confirmation.
Thank you for the question, Senator. I do like to think that my time as a legal intern in the office of Harriet Myers was a great learning experience. I actually started in the office the weekend after Hurricane Katrina. It was also the weekend that Chief Justice Rehnquist passed away. So the office was already in the middle of Supreme Court nomination process and storm response. And this was at the same time I was attending Howard University School of Law. And so to have to be able to see up close, dedicated public servants working as best they could to address issues, and it was a great learning experience to me. At the same time, I had classmates who were protesting that administration for their response on hurricane relief and other things. But it was helpful for me to always look to people of goodwill, and there were so many of those folks who were simply trying to do the right thing as they saw it. And in the Obama years, I certainly had many opportunities to work with a wide range of faith-based groups. Didn't always agree, but always dealt with based on mutual respect, understanding when they would disagree with something the administration was doing, but always looking for ways to find common ground. And certainly during my time at AmeriCorps and at CRS as an acting director, always looking to find any areas of commonality to help communities find a way forward through a stalemate or a standoff.
Well, thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations to you, Mr. Montero, and the other nominees.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Tillis. Senator Lee would like to ask another question. We're on a roll call on the floor, in fact, 2 roll calls, so the entire Senate is waiting for us. And please, if you be concise.
Sure. Judge Thompson, thanks for sharing your story with us. It's inspiring and grateful for it. I wanted to ask you briefly about there was a conference you attended and participated in as a presenter in 2018 at San Francisco State University's 2018 Constitution Day event. You participated in a presentation there that was called The History of White Supremacy in Constitutional Law. Obviously, there were some featured cases that stand out. You talked about Dred Scott, Plessy, Korematsu, to name a few that clearly are instances of that. There was a separate section within that presentation that focuses on, quote, present-day white supremacy in constitutional law. Is that, what are instances of present-day white supremacy in constitutional law? I'd like to know what that's referring to.
Thank you for that question. The seminar of which I was invited as a guest on the dais to cover a certain segment of cases and their holdings was what my role was in that particular presentation. I did not choose the title. I was a selected guest to talk about seminal cases. The cases that I talked about were those that were in the static history, Dred Scott, and then we moved into the 13th Amendment and how that abolished slavery. We then talked about Plessy versus Ferguson, and then how Brown versus Board of Education overruled that. And then we moved also to Pace versus Alabama, and we talked about how the case of Loving versus Virginia allowed people to marry those who they loved. And so the cases in which I discussed with the audience was the evolution of the law and how it is that we have a static history that we all have to live with. It's an unpleasant history in part, but it is there. And then we talked about how we evolve over time. And then we challenge young people to understand that history, not repeat it, and what resources we can provide them for a more diverse and harmonious community.
One follow-up question on that. On the 13th Amendment part of it, there were some notes in the presentation slide. I couldn't tell whether they were yours or another presenter's, but that raised the question, questions regarding the applicability of the 13th Amendment in context where someone had been duly convicted of a crime. And the quote in the notes said, the 13th Amendment permits enslaving anyone duly convicted of a crime. How can the courts justify plea agreements as due convictions given the duress under which many of them are obtained is beyond me. Is that, do you remember whether that was your?
Oh, I know exactly where that is. There was a moderator also. There were 2 of us on the dais, myself and Stanford professor Kathleen Tarr. And there was a moderator who would pivot between the 2 of us with questions. I made it very clear not to pose any questions to me that had to do with any policy issues or any sociological debates, that my role would be simply to go through the case law itself.
Right.
And I can assure you, if I am confirmed, No one will have any privilege above anyone else in my courtroom, as they have had balance throughout the last 20 years.
Okay. So you were a judge by then, and so you didn't want to have any part of that.
Exactly.
Okay,
sir.
that makes sense. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Lee. I'm going to wrap it up now, and you may be sent some written questions by members. We ask you to promptly respond if you can. I hope you will. What you have just witnessed is a recurring debate in the Senate Judiciary Committee about criminal justice. You can play this back with every panel that comes before us in some form or another, and it reflects truly difference of opinion and philosophy, although surprisingly there are many areas where we find agreement. Senator Lee and I have worked on criminal justice reform together, and we're miles apart in terms of our political philosophies. And the same is true with Senator Grassley. And I would just say this notion of soft on crime is an important bumper sticker, but it doesn't really get to the heart of the issue as far as I'm concerned. I just don't believe convicting the wrong person is anything other than being soft on crime, nor executing an innocent person and allowing a guilty person to go free is anything other than soft on crime. I do believe that prosecuting every crime rather than targeting limited prosecutorial resources to the really important ones in the community, to do otherwise would be soft on crime. I think senators, and sadly it's not Senator Lee, but there's been a senator on this panel who's put a hold on critical players in our legal system, like U.S. attorneys and U.S. marshals. That is soft on crime. We need these women and men in place to fight crime, and to hold them here for political reasons is incomprehensible to me. I think ignoring DNA evidence is not only soft on crime, it's soft-headed. If we can't look to science and respect it and what it tells us, shame on us. And finally, to call some elected officials pro-crime concerns me greatly from a panel, and this again does not apply to the senator who stays here at this moment. But there are senators on this panel who are cheerleaders and apologists for the January 6th insurrectionist mob that stormed this Capitol. It has resulted in the largest criminal prosecution in the history of the United States. 750 people have been charged so far. More to follow, I'm sorry to say. And to say that these folks were involved in some legitimate expression of political belief is disgusting and, in my mind, wrong-headed and pro-crime. To ignore the fact that 6 people died, including policemen, and 140 law enforcement officers were attacked by that mob that assaulted the Capitol on January 6th. That's a fact. And to ignore that, I just don't understand how you can, and I hope we never will ignore it. I thank you all for being here today. You've seen a slice of America's debate, and some of you have been in the middle of it and have been for a long time. We respect